And welcome back. Now, been lots of talk about fires here on the show today. The Western Cape provincial government has yet to decide whether to declare parts of the Southern Cape, including Knysna and George, disaster areas following veld fires. Around 48,000 hectares of land have been damaged by the fire, with at least 8 lives lost. And this as gale force winds continue to hamper the firefighting efforts along some parts of that garden route. And that's forced the closure of the Robinson Pass, which links Mossel Bay to Oudtshoorn, and we are continually updating that particular information for you regarding the road closures and reopenings. But to talk more about the fires, we join now in studio by Trevor Abrahams, and he is Managing Director at Working on Fire. Trevor, thanks for your time. So perhaps let's just start by talking about Working on Fire, exactly what your scope of work is.
Yeah. Working on Fire is a government expanded works program, and we provide the integrated fire management across the country. We have some 5,000 people in our employ, and we serve the country in all the provinces. We produce both our ground resources as well as our aerial resources in terms of bombers, helicopters and spotters. These are young people who are mostly unemployed, who we get trained up and are very competent wildland firefighters.
So looking at the current situation in the southern Western Cape and the resources that you have deployed as Working on Fire there.
Yeah. First of all, let me say it's rather unusual. In fact, the country has 2 fire seasons, and typically the Western Cape only really starts in December. So here we see major fires breaking out in October already. So we've had up to 19 teams around the George conflagration, where we brought 4 teams in from Free State, another 2 teams from the Eastern Cape. But at the same time, fires started up in the Tsitsikamma area. So we've had 6 teams working there. In Balindlela, we've had 2 teams. In Tlatlalani, we've had another 6 teams working, as well as the Grootvaardersbos. So there's been a range of fires. So it's really a product of the unusual weather conditions we've experienced. High temperatures, very high winds. And that's the fuel to produce the kind of fires we see, if you excuse the pun.
So climate change evidently playing a role in what's happening with the fires that we're seeing, and as you say, typically somewhat out of season. But what are you doing in order to mitigate here?
Well, in terms of integrated fire management, it's a very interesting question, because we also do a lot of the preventative work. When we're out of fire season, we are actually doing the education in our schools, we're doing education in our communities, we're doing the sort of fire breaks, we're doing the fuel load reduction. So we do the full spectrum of managing wildland fires. Of course, when the fires do break out, we become the resources that we support the municipalities, we support the local authorities in terms of being able to have the boots on the ground, having the aircraft in the air to try and combat these type of fires.
And then, Trevor, you know, some people would say, well, veld fires, that's an annual, it's a seasonal occurrence. And should we be seeing typically every year the sort of devastation that occurs?
No, there's much more we can do. I think one of the things that Minister Handekwa mentioned yesterday is that if you look at the invasive species, these are plants which are not normally naturally from our biome, and they in fact cause the spread of fire much more rapidly, they burn more intensely, and this is something that we are constantly battling with. And one of our sister programs, the Working for Water program, is involved in fact eradicating the alien invasives. And it's not only a fire risk, but it also consumes much more water than our indigenous plants do. So there's a lot more we can do, and I think you'll see the commentary after these fires in George. You know, we had Knysna in 2016. What are we doing now? And I think the lessons we have to learn is we have to do more.
But are we learning the lessons? Are we incorporating the lessons learned into our planning?
Well, it requires a broad spectrum of support. You know, it requires, official responses from the municipalities, but it also requires ordinary landowners to do their bit. And there are legislation provisions that says, you have to control the alien invasives on your piece of land, but those are the kind of issues which are coming to the fore now. So the kind of preventive work is absolutely important. But then there's also the kind of safeguarding of your properties, particularly properties which are built near the kind of forest areas. Safeguarding it in terms of having protective zones around it. you know, what's called the wild and urban interface, where we have dwellings close to, sometimes in the forest, that we have to have, in fact, much more active program of trying to prevent it. It also means in terms of housekeeping, you know, the kind of debris you have around your house, the kind of roofs, your gutters. Because what happens in these fires is that, you know, particularly the disastrous one now around Farley, where we had that unfortunate fatalities, is that you'll see spotting, and this is when the wind carries embers, and they'll burn a house down next to yours, and yours will remain standing. But so what is in fact inflammable that's around your house that can easily catch a light? So there's a number of measures that we do, and this is what we do with our preventative work when we get into the communities, when we go to schools. What you can do to minimize or mitigate the risk. You know?
Which is very interesting what you mentioned, because it takes one back to, for example, the building that was set ablaze here, or rather caught alight in the Joburg CBD, and you had firefighters, 3 of them losing their lives there. And that raises the question of, you know, the training that firefighters actually do undergo. What's your comment in that regard?
Well, look, you know, fighting fires is a hazard occupation. I mean, we were very unfortunate. They've also lost a life now in a helicopter pilot involved in the firefighting at Vermaaklikheid. So I think the first point we need to recognize, it is a very hazardous occupation. Most of your fire services have fairly stringent training and fitness regimes and competency tests, which in fact our wildland firefighters every year have to pass a yellow card test to in fact regain their authority to be able to go to the fire. Similarly, your structural firefighters, as in the case of the building, you know, engage in quite a bit of training. But the hazards, as I said, are multiple. In the case of the building, as one has heard, you know, there are a number of steps that could have been taken to probably have made that building much more resilient in terms of the fire. So when our safety standard starts, you know, slacking in structures like that, you are going to find fires that are more difficult to manage and, of course, are inherently much more dangerous. In the veld fire area, you know, one of the things we try and promote is that to respond quickly and as strongly as possible at the beginning. And very often, you know, you see a little smoke out there in the bush, in the far, you know, it's not as urgent. But, you know, throw in a bit of extra wind later on and suddenly it becomes a fire that's very difficult to manage. So some of the fire managers in the country, and I've learned, you know, get to the fire quickly and as strongly as you can to try and manage. So that's in the wildland firefighting. In the buildings, I think you've seen the fallout from that building. The kind of safety standards that need to be maintained within the buildings are absolutely essential, because otherwise we do expose our firefighters to greater danger.
So just in closing to the general public, what can people do to better equip them to deal with the fire should they find themselves in that unfortunate situation, perhaps in and around the home, the office, in your vehicle, wherever you may be?
Yeah. I think there's a number of steps they need to try and fireproof, not just their dwelling, but the area around it, particularly those communities that are living closer to our sort of forests and the wildland areas. Those are steps that I think we do try and promote. And I think the important thing is that we're learning out of these recent fires is developing better communication systems. I think the municipalities, in this case in George, has done a very good job in communicating official communications. So you've had precautionary evacuations from some of the hamlets that has, you know, obviously been done to prevent a possible catastrophe. So that's been working much better.
Well, Trevor, thank you so much for coming through and also educating us, you know, better on what actually goes into fighting of the fires in different settings as well. Thank you so much for stopping by. Trevor Abrahams is Managing Director of Working on Fire. We're going to take a break, and after that, not much time for anything else but to say goodbye.